Hi and welcome to the Birth on the Box podcast. Today we are talking about the controversial concept of low risk. And for that discussion, we are fortunate to have with us Kathryn Gutteridge. Kathryn trained as a nurse, then a midwife, and then did a master's in clinical psychology before going on to a long and varied career in maternity. And leading up to becoming the president of the Royal College of Midwives, after having led a great team that made massive changes in North Birmingham and Northwest Birmingham, so in the Sandwell area, at particularly a city hospital. And so welcome, Kathryn, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. It's lovely to be asked to do this. Any chance I can to talk about midwifery, I'm there.
Yeah, there are so many things we could talk about. And I was going to note in my intro that you were working in the on the line of maternal mental health in the 90s through your clinical psychology. You got into that area, and that a long time before it became a general focus for people at those times in the 90s. That wasn't really an area that people spent much time thinking about. And I think the support group that you established for that in the area you lived in at the time, that's still going. Is that right?
Yeah, well, last I heard, it was still functioning. Now, whether post-COVID that's the case, I don't know. But certainly in the area I live now, the model is being used by a midwife and Home Start, so it lives on.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into the topic of low risk. How would you open up the question of the concept of low risk in maternity?
So I think it's fairly well accepted that there are two risk categories: high risk, low risk. In the want really for a very simplistic approach to where women enter their pregnancy and childbirth situation. It doesn't do justice really to the many thousands of women who give birth in the UK and certainly across the world. It's a poor name for describing a woman who has an uncomplicated medical history before pregnancy, throughout pregnancy, and during the birth. So that's probably a nutshell analogy.
Okay, so it's a huge oversimplification, which helps people who are perhaps managing these kind of services to work with big buckets, isn't it? I think.
Yeah.
So what would you say about then? You mentioned that low risk used to identify people who have no complications through pregnancy and into labour and birth. Where would you start in terms of unpicking that in pregnancy? Things that might categorize you as being high risk, which perhaps are not. That's not the correct way of looking at it.
Okay, so the way I describe this is, for instance, if a woman has had a medical problem through her life, for instance, arthritis, but it's not likely to make a massive difference to her pregnancy. In fact, it may even increase her agility and ability. And certainly it won't affect how she gives birth. So I don't think it gives us a very good frame in which to help women understand how they're likely to develop through their own pregnancies and birth. And I think most obstetricians would agree with me. I know lots and lots of midwives do too. But there are risks that are outside of pregnancy. There are risks that develop during pregnancy. And of course, there are risks that happen during the birth and also beyond birth. But I think we have to have a much more holistic way of understanding the impact on the woman and not generalising, which is what we tend to do in medical field, is generalise, like diabetes, for instance. If a woman has been diagnosed as a young person with diabetes mellitus type 1, that woman will have a fantastic understanding of her body, her use of insulin, and may need a little bit of specialist help to get her through the pregnancy. Now, a woman who develops gestational diabetes late in her pregnancy is very, very different. And so these are the intricacies that we don't explain very well to women. And like you said, it's an oversimplification in general.
And so I think then you're leading us into the question of risk, and it sounds like you're arguing in favour of individual person-centred care approach rather than one of averages and models. Is that the direction you're going in there?
Yes, yeah. And I mean, if you look at the way public health works and public health doctors work, they work in clusters and they work in numbers and they work in averages, that's for sure. However, if you are working with women during their pregnancy, compassionate, continuous, personalised care all the way through, I believe if there are risks there, then it's very easy for that midwife and that woman to identify it, work with it, appropriate help if needed, but also appropriate explanations of what's going on. That woman is not average. She's not a number. And it upsets me greatly when I hear a woman's been to clinic and she was low risk up to that point, and then all of a sudden something has been picked up in clinic. For instance, a scanner's picked up the slightly more liquor or amniotic fluid in the uterus, and all of a sudden then she is reclassified as high risk. But there are so many things that we could explain that away with that wouldn't affect either the fetus or the woman when she gives birth. So okay. I think we can do much better than we do. I had hoped that Better Births, when it was launched, and the personalised care for midwives to deliver alongside obstetricians would have addressed this in the greater good. But of course, COVID happened, staffing shortages were thrown into the mix, and it is on a pause button at the moment for the majority of services. And that's a real shame, because this opportunity, I think, could radically change the way we care for women and what women experience for themselves.
Yes. So a woman who has, the example you had of who has been low risk and then suddenly something is picked up, which could be a variety of causes or could be transient, but they're suddenly told they're high risk. That would, I guess that just undermines the sense of empowerment and agency that a woman has. And that can really make a huge difference to her journey through the rest of her labor, pregnancy and birth.
Yeah, and these are the women that, but for a very simple explanation, a very and midwives at scan can do this and do it very, very well. sit down and say, it may well be that where the fetus is lying at the moment, we're picking up on smaller pools of liquor and we need to bring you back another time and rescan you. That woman would go away with a different understanding than someone who has said, oh, there's more lycra in that area, so therefore that means we'll have to rescan you, and just send her away. That doesn't offer the woman any reassurance and causes anxiety, and then, you know, who knows where that will end. So I think we can do an awful lot better with our communication around risk and how transient it is.
And the one of the topics that, or one of the aspects of risk that always seems to be there is this question of what's the framing of the risk, and how narrowly or broadly are we framing the risk?
Yeah.
And I think I remember you saying that a woman lives at home and goes through pregnancy at home in her community, and she will return there, whatever happens in the journey of pregnancy and birth, or then she will be back at home in her community. And that's the proper framing of how we look at choices and things in pregnancy. Do you want to expand on that a bit and how it relates to this issue about risk?
I think, I mean, I learned an awful lot about this back in the day by trying to understand how women with what I call enduring illnesses or lifelong illnesses have adapted in their journey with whatever that illness is. I mean, for instance, I can say that my daughter, who was diagnosed with diabetes at the age of 5 and lived with it actually through her pregnancy, understood more about it than I think most midwives and most doctors actually. And she knew when she was at home, she could manage herself, manage her condition. The minute you put someone into a clinical setting and start to take over, then what you do is you disrupt the whole of those structures the woman has created. So, for instance, breastfeeding and the way the woman absorbs insulin during breastfeeding. Some women need to cut down, and my daughter definitely did, cut down on her short-acting insulin because she knew that by the time the feed was over, she'd be jittery, shaky, sweaty, need a snack. And most women who breastfeed know that it's sensible to have a drink and a snack by them because it utilizes your insulin and sugar demands. So I really, really think that we have this arrogant approach to we know best, and we from the start try to take over, when in fact women do much better if we say something to them like, goodness me, you must know how your body works. What can I do to enable you better? And what kind of things do you want from me so that when you do come into hospital or you do come in labour, I'm not having to learn from you and assume. So that's an example, I think, of what we unthinkingly do as healthcare professionals. We assume we know, and we don't. We really, really don't. We know about the disease. We understand the etiology of it. We don't know the personalisation of it. And that woman will go back to her husband, who recognises her pallor or her voice changes when she's starting to become hypo. And he knows to be ready with whatever it is that works for her. So we miss a huge trick if we don't ask that woman what we can do to help, rather than assume we're going to do it for her.
Yes, that idea of, you're now in a healthcare setting, and therefore we're taking over,
Yeah,
and we know what you need.
yeah,
That misses so much,
it
so
does.
much.
Yeah.
What's you've talked about how uh, women with pre-existing conditions or chronic conditions, they will know a lot about their
Mm,
about that and how they manage it, the strategies they've come up with to manage
mm,
those conditions. What about women where something unexpected comes up in the pregnancy journey?
okay.
What would you what would you advise them in terms of um, trying to get the right kind of engagement or dialogue with their um, midwife or
Mm.
other carers?
So I think, again, this is the appropriation of risk, isn't it? So say, for instance, a woman develops um, hypertensive disease in pregnancy. So her blood pressure goes up.
Yeah,
Um, it's a common feature. So if the woman is a prima gravida, having her first baby, she may never have encountered this before. So she'll need a great deal of explanation, reassurance, and a discussion about when it's likely to become more concerning. So rather than saying you've got high blood pressure and we need to do A, B, and C, we need to sit with her and look at the implication. So it may well be it's, for instance, the weather we've had the last week or so, rare that it is in the UK, but I
yeah,
imagine an awful lot of women who are near to the end of their pregnancies will be carrying more fluid and will be perhaps in that slight hypertensive group. And I think it's important. Okay, have we got a
I
problem?
lost you for a second. I don't
Oh,
know
okay.
quite what that was. You're back now. Yeah, yeah. So
Okay.
so you were talking about the hot weather,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so women maybe in late pregnancy maybe um, have pushed into the hypertensive group
Yeah.
because as a result of the weather.
Yeah, and they'll carry a little bit more fluid because their body is near to the end of pregnancy, and it may just be with doing some blood tests, checking that the fetus is well, and there's no implication there. That doesn't necessarily mean that that woman automatically has to be monitored um, exclusively in a high risk way.
Mm.
I do think, and this is what we need to do better, but women need to know, is that women can be high risk in their pregnancy, but be actually have limited risks for the birth. And
Right.
just because, say, for instance, and you'll know, Adam, when I did the work in Birmingham and we set up our birthing centre there, the Serenity Birth Centre, I wrote the guidelines actually at the time, not really having a clear idea of the population basis, because that's another thing. The population brings with it certain conditions
Yeah.
that we'll expect more. So, say for instance, a high Asian population, we'll see much more diabetes, we'll see other conditions like thyroid disease, etc. So, we need to have a much more, I won't say flexible, but I think we need to have a much more, what's the word I'm looking for?
Is it varied or adaptable or what?
I think it's more about adapting, and I think
Yeah.
it has to be. It's not finite. That's what I would say.
Right.
And so, for instance, I mentioned Serenity Birth Centre. After a year, and I made the midwives' lives during that year hell because I got them to collect all sorts of data for every single birth, for every little bit of that woman's condition. But what that gave us was a wonderful demographic of the women who were using our service.
Yeah.
So I was able to see that having a high Asian population using the service, and that they were largely vegetarian in their diet, meant that their iron levels or hemoglobin levels were largely lower than your average Caucasian. So what we did, we adapted our inclusion criteria to say that actually if a woman is picked up during pregnancy with a HB or an iron level of 9, and she's taking medication to maintain that, then we were quite happy to have that woman, because what we showed in that first year was our postpartum hemorrhage rates were negligible. The impact on women during labour, it really doesn't make a great deal of difference. It's the management of the afterbirth and the third stage that makes a difference, and our rates were particularly good. So I felt quite confident to adjust the criteria to say, yeah, you know, if women are taking appropriate medication and we check it around 36, 37 weeks, to me, that is mitigating risk, and it's having a much more flexible and person-centered approach to risk.
That is very interesting, and I really pick up on the word confidence there, because what that really says a lot about is that you had the confidence to take that approach, but you also had the relationships in your organization that enabled you to take that approach, and that's relationships with obstetricians, it's relationships, you know, with risk manager and management in the hospital generally, and that's the subject of, we could have a long time talking about that, couldn't we? Because I think that with a lot of the a lot of things about supporting women and labour and birth, so many things that we know that are good are hard to do in practice, because of an individual's confidence is not supported or isn't replicated, isn't shared, and is not supported in the organisation they're in, and that seems like that's a theme coming through in some of the reports, isn't there, about UK maternity? Is this almost fault lines between different disciplines in the hospital?
I think what many units make the mistake of is not acknowledging that midwives know what they're doing. I know that sounds a very kind of throwaway comment, but right from the start of my consultancy role, if you like, firstly at Leicester, and then secondly in Birmingham, I was very clear I knew what midwifery was. I was also very clear when things weren't right, of who I should involve. Now, it's not always an obstetrician. It may well be an anaesthetist. It may well be an neonatologist. But it's having clear confidence, I think, in doing the job you're trained to do. And I remember one of my criteria for the birth centre in the development, because I was very fortunate I was involved before the birth centre was even opened. One of my criteria was a pool in every room, and that was the standard. And of course, you know, you get, oh, I'm not sure we can afford it, I'm not sure we can get the water through. And so my response to that was, well, let's look at it this way. If women coming into your high-risk delivery suite have a more complex birth than what was anticipated, or we think she may need support in theatre, there's never a question about having an epidural. ever. So I know for low risk women, water makes a huge difference. So for me, that's equivalent to having an epidural on delivery suite. Look at the cost of what it's provided over a year. And I actually did that analysis for them and worked out how much it cost to the women that had given birth on delivery suite to provide epidurals for. It didn't even come anywhere near what it would be for the infrastructure to put pools in every room.
Right.
And I think we just have to do what we know best. So for me, it was always advocating for women for the best care that they could have.
Yeah.
And one other thing I want to say about the pools, Adam, was, of course, you get the health and safety people from the trust come round, and they came down and said, what about midwives' backs and bending over? And I said, well, you obviously have never seen a birth where women are in the pool. Midwives don't lean over the pool all the time, they're present, but they're not in that position for hours on end. In fact, assisting a woman breastfeeding is more likely to cause back problems than leaning over a pool. Then the next thing came, well, what are you going to do if a woman is having some fit or passes out or whatever? How are you going to get her out the pool? We need to have the lifting out equipment.
Yeah. A hoist.
I said, okay. I said, I'll get you some data first. So I contacted every unit I could. I think it was about 50 units I contacted, and I asked if they had a pool and if they'd ever used the hoist. And what came back was the only reason they used the hoist was to practice if they needed to use it. So I made the decision that, this is a risk we'll take. And as far as I'm concerned, that is a minuscule risk of that happening. And we used the netting, and we used very, I think, practical ways of how you would get a woman out of a pool if you needed to, instead of buying very expensive equipment. And this is when we have to stand by women, because having an analogy that, oh my God, you've got all this expensive equipment around you, means that women feel there must be a risk here. And we know that invariably there's not. So Kathy Warwick, bless her, when she was CEO of the Royal College of Midwives, she asked me if she could tell that story. And I know she told it time and time again, saying, look, we'll take that risk, thank you very much. That's not yours to worry about, and let's move on. So there we are.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you took us a bit into risk for the midwives as well, because that's clearly that is a big part of the discussion about whether to adopt the use of water, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
In hospitals, definitely. Yeah, fantastic. Kathryn, we're going to start to wrap up here. So, what would you say to midwives who are working in an environment that doesn't currently have this level of person-centered philosophy at its core, in terms of how they can help grow that culture, or can they make a meaningful difference, or do they need? Sometimes they may need to move to go somewhere where the culture is different.
Yeah.
What would you say to young midwives, or any midwives who are in that situation?
Yeah, I get that it's hard at the moment, and I understand the impact of what these reviews are having. And I'd like to just say here and now that these, and it almost seems continuous, reviews, investigations, and exposures of maternity services is opening up a whole load of fear for midwives and obstetricians, actually. So, we're not alone. What I would say is, remember why you came to the job. Remember possibly your own birth or a birth that you've witnessed. And I would say, as long as you advocate for the woman, you find out what's important to her, you listen to her instead of telling her, and you accommodate her within the context of what is available to you. So, for instance, if you don't have a pool, do you have a bath in the place where that woman is birthing? And we know that it's a common conversation on the telephone in triages. Have 2 paracetamol and get in the bath and give us a call back in a couple of hours. So if we can do that for women at home, we can do that for women in our birthing places. Also, I would say be positive, be optimistic. And people say, oh, it's easy for you, you're not in the job anymore. Actually, I feel it's a bit harder now because I'm not in the job, because I don't have that impact that I could have had when I was in the job. But remember what you're there for. You're there because you love the fact that you can be with a woman who's going to give birth to a baby. Be honest with the woman as well, and be upfront about what you can do and what you can't do. And if you're working in an environment that day after day is taking more from you than it's giving to you, have the courage to either stand up and say that, or go to somewhere else where they will appreciate what you've got to offer. Never be afraid to take that decision to move, because that place needs you. If you've got more to give and you can't give it where you are, then somewhere will be desperate for you to come and to be that advocate.
Okay, fantastic. Kathryn, thank you so much. That's been it's been an introduction to the concepts of low risk. It's a big topic, isn't it?
It is.
But I think that the themes there are coming through very clearly around context, around women knowing their own bodies, knowing how to manage things that they may have. That they may have things they're managing constantly throughout their lives before pregnancy, and really being very person-centered. And I think those last words of encouragement to midwives to be positive, whatever the constraints are, whatever the situation is, whatever the fear in the organization you're in, because of this is in the UK, there's a lot of reviews of maternity services in the recent past, and probably in the future, unfortunately. And then you still have the power, don't you, to be positive and to be person-centered, and to build trust with a woman who's going through the amazing process of labouring and birth.
Yeah, there's, I think it's on my Twitter. Is it Twitter now? I don't know what it is.
It's called X now, isn't it? I think.
Gosh. Okay. But this phrase that I always use is, giving birth is a gigantic leap of faith. And it's not just a leap of faith for the woman, it's a leap of faith for the midwife too. Never, ever doubt what you're doing, because you are the hands that baby will be laid into at the point of birth. And there's not many jobs you can say that have such a huge impact on a family. So
absolutely,
yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate that. And I'm really as I said, we could have you back and talk about another 10 different topics, but that's a separate thing. So